I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. At the outset, we would like to congratulate Mexico on its assumption of the presidency of the Security Council for the month of November. We would also like to express our gratitude to the delegation of Mexico for having convened this open debate and for submitting the concept note on the topic. We thank the President of the General Assembly, the President of the Economic and Social Council, the President of the International Court of Justice, and the Secretary General for their briefings. Mr. President, promoting and sustaining international peace is a key issue for the Non-Aligned Movement. The movement and its member states have historically opposed war and supported peace. At the 18th Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement held in Baku in October 2019, the heads of state and government of member states reaffirmed the validity of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the principles and norms of international law as indispensable to preserving and promoting peace and security, the rule of law, economic development, and social progress in all human rights for all. The faithful observance of the principles of international law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states and the fulfillment in good faith of the obligations assumed by states in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations are of the greatest importance for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Non-Aligned Movement is committed to supporting and promoting the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the principles and norms of international law, including those relating to the territorial integrity of states and inviolability of their international borders, the inadmissibility of the use of force, non-interference in the internal affairs of states, and the right to self-determination of peoples under foreign occupation and colonial or alien domination. The movement denounces and demands the repeal of unilateral coercive measures against member states that are not authorized by the Security Council in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations or are inconsistent with the principles of international law or the Charter, given their extraterritorial implications in a legal character as they violate human rights and prevent the full economic and social development of the peoples subjected to them. Multiple complex and newly emerging threats and challenges to international peace and security necessitate the renewal of our collective commitment to the values of multilateralism and international cooperation, which underpin the Charter of the United Nations and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Preserving and strengthening these values are fundamental to promoting and supporting the three pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights. The movement reiterates its grave concern at the increasing continuing encroachment by the Council on issues which clearly fall within the functions and powers of other principal organs of the UN and their subsidiary bodies. In that sense, the movement reminds that the principal organs of the UN have distinct and separate roles in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and reaffirms that they have to carry out only those functions and powers that are established in their respective mandates. Close cooperation and coordination among these organs is highly indispensable in order to enable the United Nations to remain relevant and capable of meeting the existing, new, and emerging threats and challenges. In that context, at the 18th Summit of the movement, the heads of state and government urged all states to uphold the primacy of and full respect for the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations pertaining to the functions and powers of the General Assembly and called on the presidents of the General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, and the Security Council to conduct regular discussions and coordination among themselves regarding the agenda and program of the work of the respective principal organs in order to establish increased coherence and complementarity among these organs in a mutually reinforcing manner, respectful of each other's mandate, and with a view to generating a mutual understanding among them with whom the members of the respective organs have vested in good faith their trust and confidence. The movement emphasizes the significant role played by the International Court of Justice, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, in promoting and encouraging the settlement of international disputes by peaceful means in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Charter of the United Nations and the Statute of the Court. The movement urges the Security Council, the General Assembly, and other organs of the United Nations, as well as its specialized agencies that are duly authorized to do so, to make greater use of the International Court of Justice as a source of advisory opinions and interpretation of international law within the scope of their activities. Faithful to its commitment to strengthening its role as an anti-war and peace-loving force, the movement reaffirms its determination to work for the establishment of a peaceful and prosperous world and a just and equitable world order. We also renew our determination to work for a multipolar world through the strengthening of the United Nations and multilateral processes, which are indispensable to our efforts to promote the interests of our nations and humankind as a whole. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al representante.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Albania.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for convening this meeting. Since first articulated 3 decades ago by the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, the concept of preventive diplomacy has undergone substantial changes. Preventive diplomacy relates to the core of our profession, of our collective work, and our continued efforts as it aims to prevent disputes and, more particularly, prevent escalation into conflicts. Preventive diplomacy remains highly relevant in efforts to preserve peace and security, and today is being conducted by a broader array of actors using a wider range of tools. As mentioned in the recent report of Secretary General, Our Common Agenda, the UN should focus more on system-wide cooperation and in its efforts on prevention. Preventive efforts should be seen as a most valuable investment. The biggest return comes, obviously, in lives saved, but prevention may also have a strong economic impact. The World Bank has calculated that the average cost of a civil war is equivalent to more than 30 years of gross domestic product growth for a medium-sized developing country. Let's take an example. The economic cost of the conflict in Syria after 10 years is estimated to be over 1.2 trillion in US dollars. Even if the conflict were to end today, its cost will continue to accumulate, if not double, for another decade. 10 years of war has reduced Syrian children's overall life expectancy by 13 years. It's staggering. Therefore, every effort invested in prevention, however difficult or slow, in producing the desired results is far less costly and has the potential of a multiplier effect for a positive outcome. Mr. President, in order to put prevention at the heart of its work, the UN should improve its mechanisms to identify and consider the warning signals of potential conflicts and act before. In this regard, as the United Nations organ with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Security Council has a key role to play in prevention. Over years, the Council has considerably improved its work through a greater engagement and flexibility in addressing emerging threats before they are placed on the Council's formal agenda, in promoting a more active approach to preventive diplomacy. But not always. It took the Council several months to have an open meeting on the conflict in Ethiopia, where unfortunately every horrible and reprehensible act on the book was taking place, with huge consequences for the population and bleak prospects for the country. Mr. President, let me highlight a few key important points which we think will help to improve prevention capacities of the UN. First, the Peace-Building Commission, as a dedicated intergovernmental platform to oversee and guide the UN system approach to sustaining peace, should be empowered. A more effective peace-building fund is needed, and we should explore innovative ways to increase the contributions to the fund as one of the most important instruments to finance preventive action on the ground.